for our webinar on managing risk by mechanical integrity. I am Mark Yukich, U.S. Technical Development Manager at Sigma-HSE, and I will be your host today. I have nearly 10 years of process safety industry experience. That experience includes combustible dust, flammable vapor, and chemical reaction hazards, and steps to mitigate those hazards in process. I enjoy the time to understand the pain points for our customers related to process safety. If we don't have the option to assist, I want to ensure we hand you off to a team we trust to bring value to your safety team. Please feel free to contact me should you need any assistance. Sigma-HSE is a global engineering firm with technical experts supporting companies around the world to provide actionable solutions to protect, enhance, and optimize their process. We provide actionable risk assessments and testing solutions so you can focus on what really matters: protection for your people, business, workplace, and the environment. In this webinar, we will discuss the importance of overseeing mechanical integrity within your process safety management program. We will cover equipment management standards, components of a robust program, risk management mastery, and the high cost of neglect. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. Feel free to add questions to the questions section during the training, and we will address those questions at the end of our program. Doug Gruder will be our process safety consultant leading our discussion today. Doug, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Doug Gruder. I'm a process safety consultant with Sigma-HSE. I have over 28 years of plant-based experience, which includes process control, operations, and process safety. What we're going to be talking about today is mechanical integrity systems. We'll go through the elements. We'll tell you what it is, what it applies to, who is covered, and what other components should be included in your system. We'll also be showing some guidance which is available and what is needed to develop and maintain an efficient, effective mechanical integrity system. You see here the 20 elements of PSM. Number 10 is asset integrity and reliability. This is where your mechanical integrity program should fit in. So OSHA requires that all of these elements are pulled together into your PSM system, and quite a number of them, they're not independently standing. They all interact with each other. So, going on to what is mechanical integrity. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples and an explanation. First and foremost, you're going to realize that mechanical integrity is actually opposite of doing breakdown maintenance. The objective here is to monitor and measure the systems, the equipment, and in your mechanical integrity program, and correct any deficiencies before there is a breakdown. Also, this is done, right, by ensuring that the equipment and instrumentation is installed and maintained per the original design standards. And you're going to hear me saying this throughout the presentation. The original design standards, the manufacturer's recommendations for maintenance and for installation should be used. If your facility is so old that you no longer have these, then we need to switch over to ragged gaps, recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices. Your program must consist of procedures for testing, maintenance, and inspection, what you're going to do if you come across a deficiency, and the quality assurance procedures that ensure that you're doing the testing correctly. Another very important component is to have qualified and trained maintenance personnel. These are the people out in the plant that ensure that your equipment will work when called upon, thus potentially mitigating or eliminating a process safety event. So what does mechanical integrity apply to? All your process equipment, excuse me, all of your process equipment, vessels, piping, valves, and instrumentation that's used as a basis of safety, your critical equipment. These include interlocks, both the sensor, logic solver, and final control element. With an understanding of that, I'll dive a little deeper into critical equipment. So, like I stated, it's equipment that are key to preventing and controlling or mitigating events. Typically, they're looked at as your last line of defense. How do we determine these? They are identified during PHAs and are taken as safeguards to reduce the likelihood of an event occurring. These devices must be in your mechanical integrity program. Some additional equipment to be included in the program include explosion suppression devices, explosion suppression devices, control systems, and anything that is identified as a safeguard in a PHA. Some guidance on what to include is given by regulations, codes and standards, and guidelines. So there are a number of regulations in various countries, codes and standards, best practices, and guidelines. Like I said, what we're going to be doing is referring to ragged gaps. In the United States, OSHA and the EPA have two different systems. OSHA has process safety management, but also for certain plants, the EPA will have a requirement for a risk management program. The RMP has a lot more requirements than PSM. So the first thing to do with the EPA is determine if you're a category 1, 2, or 3 site. In Europe, they have Cerveza and ATEX. And ATEX is a requirement for equipment. The equipment you buy can be ATEX certified. So keep that in mind when you're going through things. As I said earlier, we're going to be talking a lot about manufacturers' requirements and specifications. This is the first thing you should be looking at. And if you have those, the testing and maintenance procedures should follow from them. Some available resources include AICHE's risk-based process safety, and there are 2 other books, Mechanical Integrity Systems and Asset Integrity. API also has some recommended practices that you can use if you don't have the manufacturer's recommendation. And this typically happens in an older plant. A component of mechanical integrity is monitoring, measuring, and control. The program should include procedures, documented procedures for monitoring your critical equipment, measuring it, and conducting maintenance on it. In a new plant, this is typically put together and covered during the pre-startup safety review to make sure that all of this information is in your system. Some general steps to develop an MI program include identifying critical equipment in your PHAs, develop preventive maintenance procedures, develop inspection procedures, and then use them to monitor and measure equipment performance against what is expected. Effective mechanical integrity programs require a fundamental understanding of failure modes and how we can detect and prevent the failure of the equipment. A written maintenance program for all critical equipment. This is something that needs to be developed, and your inspection and testing needs to be based on good engineering practices. Once again, manufacturer's recommendation, that's the bedrock of your program, and operating experience. Preventive maintenance as part of the program is to ensure that the equipment that you have, which is keeping you safe, is going to work when it's called upon to. Again, you see written procedures is a requirement. And after we develop the list of critical equipment, okay, we need to determine and ensure that the inspection requirements and frequencies are in accordance with those manufacturers' requirements. Inspection and testing is also a very important part of this. The frequency of inspections again, should be in line with the manufacturer's recommendations. So that is a theme you will hear over and over, is the manufacturer's recommendations. Should include erosion and corrosion, internal inspections, okay, and acceptable limits should be defined. And when the inspection happens, they should be referred to. And what I'm talking about here is, say you have corrosion inside a vessel, maybe yearly testing, X-ray testing of the vessel to see if you're below the minimum thickness. And what you're going to do if you are below the minimum thickness. You certainly don't want to have a distillation column which has corroded internally to a point that it is below the minimum thickness allowed to operate, and you keep running it. Again, a little more on inspection and testing. Every piece of equipment has a mean time to failure. Your inspections should be designed to take this into account. That being said, keep in mind the bathtub curve, which indicates that there is increased failure rates at the beginning of a piece of equipment or systems time, which then flattens out, and then when it needs to be replaced, you'll see again an increase in the failure rate. So this can be developed by keeping good inspection results, but not only doing the inspection results and shoving them in the drawer, but having your reliability engineer actually plot these things and see where on this curve you are. Documentation, very important. You have to have the procedures, which will show what needs to be done and when. And those procedures should have some type of quality assurance. People should review them, and actually you should get some feedback saying, this is a good inspection and testing, these are good procedures, or they need to be improved. Equipment deficiencies is always what you're trying to catch here before they hit the point of breakdown maintenance. So in summary, equipment and instrumentation must be maintained, right? And how do we do that? We do that by using the manufacturer's guidelines and requirements. Your program should contain procedures for preventive maintenance, testing, and inspection. What happens if you find a deficiency in the equipment? And maintenance personnel training, which is very important. If your person in the field is doing the test incorrectly or doesn't understand how to do the test, you're going to get erroneous results and put you and your plant and the people working there at risk, because the equipment will not work as designed. Maintaining documentation is very important. for a key program, effective program. And that's because people come and go in manufacturing, and you need to make sure that newer people coming into the system know what they're doing. So tribal knowledge is not a good way to maintain a mechanical integrity program. Mark?
All right, thanks, Doug. And we made it through the technical hiccups, but good work, and thank you. So apologies again for that, but we all have those technology issues sometimes. So if you have any questions, please add them to the chat, or you can send it and send. We can go ahead and directly answer those. But we do have some questions here. Doug, first question we have is, you mentioned written documentation with preventative maintenance. Is there a suggestion to how often those documents should be reviewed?
Certainly they should be reviewed if there is any change. They also should be reviewed if you start finding deficiencies in the equipment that you're inspecting. If there's no changes and there's no problems, I'd refer you back to the bathtub curve. And if the reliability engineer feels confident that he's on the stable portion of the bathtub curve, I would recommend every 3 to 5 years.
Okay, perfect. Another question is, what are the best practices for monitoring and mitigating corrosion in high risk areas of the plant?
Right, there are two components to corrosion. There's internal corrosion, which should be taken care of by your materials of construction, making sure that what the metallurgy of the equipment is suitable for the chemicals that you're using. External corrosion, corrosion under insulation, is definitely a problem. And what you can do there is do X-ray testing or UV testing to determine the thickness of what you have. I've seen plants that have both internal and external corrosion. An inspection, if you know there's an area where you're getting external corrosion, it would be good to inspect those areas periodically. And a lot of times your corrosion under insulation is because you have an older type of insulation on there, usually fiberglass, that holds and wicks up moisture and holds that against the metal of the system. And there are a lot of insulating companies now that offer alternative substances that will not do that.
All right. Another one here is, what risk assessment methodologies are most effective for identifying potential mechanical integrity issues?
Well, first of all, you have to identify what your critical equipment is that should be included in your mechanical integrity program. And that is usually done by knowing the mean time to failure for the equipment you're working with. Those are usually identified in a HAZUP LOPA, which is a combination of HAZUP and layer protection analysis. Excuse me. But your initiating event should be identified using industry standard data or RAGA gaps. And at Sigma, we have a list of those mean time to failures that we can incorporate into our studies.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Question here is understand if in terms of mechanical integrity, they understand checking interlocks and alarms. What does mechanical integrity look like with respect to BMS and PLC?
Yeah, a lot of times companies will check the interlocks and alarms during a shutdown. And again, these have to be critical alarms and interlocks. But ideally, and this is very difficult to do, you want to check the whole interlock system through, from the sensor through the logic solver, which is your PLC or your basic process control system, to the final control element. So an example of that would be a high pressure interlock that closes a valve. You want to simulate high pressure at the sensor, make sure that the final control element, say a shutoff valve, closes at the right point.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Doug. Another one is more on the written maintenance program about it being developed. The question is, what does this look like? For example, how would it go over and beyond work instructions on the equipment?
Yeah, that's a good question. You should have a overall document policy that covers, in general, your equipment, your vessels, and then each vessel, interlock, pump, needs to have a separate work instruction that's tied back to that policy. So work instructions are great. Just having work instructions is not a proper mechanical integrity program. You need the overall document and how it relates, what you're going to do to the different pieces of your critical equipment. And there are a lot of classes out there that you can take that will guide you through developing a mechanical integrity program and what OSHA requires, the codes and regulations that OSHA requires in that program. But yeah, a work instruction by itself is not a mechanical integrity program.
Okay. And one other question here looks at what are the general steps involved in conducting a root cause analysis for mechanical integrity failures?
Okay, so whenever you have a piece of equipment in your mechanical integrity program, and you have a failure, an incident investigation should be completed. Depending on the severity, you can do a number of different types of incident investigations. You can do a basic 5Y, or you could do an ECF, incident investigation, where you identify the series of events and then drive down on the events into causal factors and finally ending up at the root cause. It's important to drive down to the root cause because correcting the causal factors will not, in the long term, keep the failures from happening again. And root causes should always be a management system failure. And it's either, say, an operator or a mechanic or an engineer did something wrong that caused the failure. It's not the individual's fault. It's the management system failure. Why was the person allowed to do the job when he didn't have the training or the knowledge? So always drive it down to a management system failure. Never, ever blame the people involved in the event.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have at the moment. Well, once again, thank you, Doug, and thank you everyone for joining us for our discussion today covering mechanical integrity. Should you need any assistance with testing and process safety support, please feel free to contact us at info-us@sigma-hse.com. We look forward to being a resource to you, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.